Okay. Where do we start on Ben Franklin? Where do you want to start there?
Why not?
Go ahead, James. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, this is...
Live free or die.
Live free or die. Well, join
or die.
Join or die.
Yeah.
This is probably where you start with Franklin. It's one of two major Franklin contributions to who we are. The year 1754, the French are stepping up their operations to drive us into the sea. Indian raids on the frontier, French troops coming up the Ohio, coming across the Great Lakes. And the militia system just isn't working. And Franklin, who is now publishing the most important newspaper, the author of the Poor Richard's Almanacs, the postmaster for the colonies, starts circulating the idea of an American militia. All the colonies chipping in according to their population, an army of its own, of our own, which would work with the British, work under British command, and undertake aggressive operations to push the French back down the Ohio.
Okay, now wait a minute. These were Americans. He was saying this wasn't the American Revolution. This was to come after the French.
This is
as British, as American British citizens.
If you said to him in 1754, "What are you?" he would say, "An Englishman,
right,
a Philadelphian, and a scientist." And then they'd laugh uproariously.
Would he be wearing clothes?
He took air baths, which are nude aerobics, to get his pulse up to 100. And
everybody else's pulse up to about 1,000. Jeez.
The only house he lived in that's still standing is in London. And it's right behind Charing Cross Station. It's a museum now. And next time you're in London, go to the Craven Street Franklin House. And there you'll see, because as with most houses in those days, you enter from the ground floor, but the real dwelling is up on what we would call the second floor. They call it the first floor. And Franklin's apartment is right on the front of the house, and it's big 6-foot-tall windows, which in those days would be open. And in the morning, he would stand in these windows.
I want to get back to the join or die snake thing, but I'm fascinated by the. I mean, was he an exhibit? What the hell was he doing?
He was getting his pulse up to 100. He did aerobics. He believed he's the first aerobicist.
Is it because we didn't have spandex that he wasn't wearing pants?
Well, people swum in the nude.
Oof. Wow, I just don't want to think of Benjamin Franklin naked. Am I alone in that?
Oh, contraire. I mean,
no, don't, please. You might incriminate yourself here.
This was a guy who could ride horseback from Williamsburg to Boston. This was a guy who was a printer. This was a strong 5'11".
He looks like a basset hound.
He's old in that.
That's an old
But through most of his life, he was a Hulk. Come on, Madison.
No. Let's go back to the snake.
Madison and the rest of them are 5'4". He's 5'11". He's buff.
All right. So the
if you'd walked by, you'd have stopped and said, "Wow," on a number of reasons. Okay, let's go back to 1754.
Yeah.
1754.
This is the way history.
He starts circulating this plan. Let's get going. Let's get the discussion going. He created essays in his newspapers. He mailed hundreds of letters all over the colonies. He started debates. He started arguments. And then in June, there was going to be a meeting in Albany, New York, to re-bribe the Indian allies of our side and make sure that fix was in, and then to have a conference of all the military leaders of the colonies. And the month before, Franklin, scholars believe, did the drawing and did the engraving of the printing block, and it appeared in his Pennsylvania Gazette. And you can't see it from here, but you can see it there. Every piece of the serpent is listed as one of the colonies. And it's based on a French myth, but that one every American child knew. If you're going to chop a snake up, you have to bury the parts separately because snakes can get back together and live. Now, it's a myth, But this picture immediately, even people who couldn't read, knew what the message was.
Let me give you a side note here before you continue. I just had this because this was never a flag. This was a political cartoon, later used as a banner, I think, carried by some.
Yes.
Yes, but it was never a flag. I had this made for my house because I put old flags and banners in front of my house just to drive my neighbors crazy. This one, 2 years ago, we got called. The city called us and said the neighbors complained because they thought I was inciting violence. Really, join or die. They're like, what kind of cult is he running over at his house? Join or die. I'm like, just the Ben Franklin cult. We just get together and take air baths. Want to come and watch?
PETA must have complained.
I mean, it was bad. It was bad. It was bad. Okay, so he was saying join or die. But can you give me the significance on the snake? On the rattlesnake was really.
Well, this is a rattlesnake. There are rattles on there.
And he wanted the rattlesnake to actually be our national symbol.
Absolutely.
Why?
Well, he said, look, the rattlesnake doesn't bother anybody. He goes away when you approach him. He does useful work keeping down vermin. He's cautious and placid, but he's never afraid. So you don't tread on him. And in that explanation came the idea of the coiled "don't tread on me" serpent. And he thought it would be a fitting picture of us in people's minds. You had the British lion, the French rooster, the Spanish dog, in all the cartoons of those days. And the American serpent lasted for about 25 years before, again, people said, no, I think maybe we ought to have an eagle.
All right.
But at one point, he wanted a turkey.
Well, that's what he said.
So well, that's ridiculous. Really, the snake is, because Franklin wrote about this when I think it was Washington was going through Philadelphia, and they had it on the drums. They had the snake on the drums, and he wrote it in the paper and they said, why the snake? And he explained it, and I think it's great. His eyes are always alert. He is always alert. The rattle always shakes to warn you if you're getting too close. It will never strike out. It will warn you first. And then if you push it, it will strike, but only when provoked. I think it's a fitting. Yeah, that's right, my neighbors. Oh, yes, it's fitting.
So,
all right, hang on just a sec. We'll come right back in just a minute. Welcome back to Founders Fridays. There's a few books. When I first started reading about the founders, I like to read their own words. This is the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. It's excellent. But I mean, look at it, just like it's excellent. This is one of our guests. This is James Rhodes. It is Franklin, the Essential Founding Father. Excellent, excellent book. Larry doesn't have a book on Benjamin Franklin. I don't know what his deal is. But Larry is a great historian on America, and this is his latest book, 7 Events That Made America America. You've got to own his stuff. And this is, also a great place to begin. I love this. It's a series, The Real Ben Franklin, The Real George Washington, and The Real Benjamin Franklin. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Ben Franklin. This is a great series, all available online, or glennbeck.com. You can find them all. Okay, let me just go. Let's do some rapid fire here on what are the essential things that people don't know that you think people need to know about Benjamin Franklin.
Well, Benjamin Franklin was one of the richest men in America, and that's amazing because he starts so poor. Starts as an apprentice, works his way up through the printing business, gets to be a partner, gets to be an owner. At one point, he's estimated to have a worth in the 1750s of about 2,000 pounds income a year. Now, put that in the context, the richest Philadelphia lawyer that year had an income of 20 pounds.
Holy cow.
So he was a landlord, a renter, and yet he was one of the most popular of all the founders. Some say he was more popular than Washington, and the reason was he was an everyman.
He was gregarious.
He came through the ranks. People liked him. He spoke in homilies that they could understand.
Right. Washington had a mystique about him to where you revered him, where you know, it's the thing we always read in poems, in polls now. You know, I'd like to have a beer with the president. He's the guy you'd have a beer with. Well, not too many, or he'd take his clothes off, but you'd have the beer with Benjamin Franklin.
The famous example of Washington, where one of his aides was on a dare, asked to go up and slap him on the back. Right. And Washington just turns and gives him such a cold look. No one ever touches Washington again. Franklin would laugh and probably say, "Come see my kite."
Right.